Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage here on our station. This week we speak with the man behind the return of the dire wolf.
For like a kid or a parent to like look at a trusted magazine like Time and see the potential of synthetic biology made real, it was a really moving experience.
Plus, fashion designer Bianca Saunders publishes a new zine.
This one, Fate Love Lane, was kind of about like my cultural background and identity exploration.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And talking about the dire wolf, earlier this month, scientists announced the return of it, a species that vanished more than 12,000 years ago and found pop culture fame thanks to Game of Thrones. The news broke on the covers of Time, The New Yorker, and Rolling Stone magazines before making headlines around the world. At the center of it all is Ben Lan, CEO and co-founder of Colossal Biosciences, a company working to bring back extinct species like the woolly mammoth and the dodo. Monocle's Laura Kramer caught up with Ben to talk about the science behind the breakthrough, what it means for conservation, and what it was like seeing their dire wolf, Ramos, on the cover of Time.
Personally, as a kid, well, in my grandfather, my poppy's office, he had a photo of me and a photo of him together on the cover and had a mock photo of us on Time. And so it's kind of, for me personally, I just don't know, and this is respecting all media out there. I know there's a lot of great media out there, but Time is truly timeless. And to have a picture of Remus on the cover of Time, alluding to the importance of these technologies for conservation, I mean, I don't know if there's anything that can really top that. One of the things that was really wonderful was that Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, and in the New Yorker, we didn't go out super wide with this to begin. And obviously that changed very quickly. But, you know, they spent a lot of time with us. They saw the wolves. They spent time with our team. You know, they probably spent, it feels like on our side, we spent 100 hours with them. And so I feel like they really understood the importance of the work, scientific achievement, which is like the equivalent of the moon landing for genetics. And I feel like they really understood what it meant for conservation. We had no idea it was going to be a cover. And I think it's truly remarkable, not just for Colossal, but for science, right? It's like we see a lot of cover stories right now, and we get sold a lot of, and I'm not just saying just with Time, but a lot of, you know, we've got tariff wars, we've got chip wars, we've got AI wars, we've got all this like negative hope. And so for like a kid or a parent to like look at a trusted magazine like Time and see the potential of synthetic biology made real, it was a really moving experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure throughout all this, you've seen a whole plethora of different reactions from people. Has anything really surprised you, actually? Because I'm assuming you were prepared for the ethics questions. You were prepared for how is the science? And, you know, shouldn't this be better spent elsewhere? But has there been a reaction that actually you weren't prepared for? They're like, oh, this is weird. I didn't think this would happen.
Well, I think my three surprises are, the first one, the money should be spent on conservation. We completely agree. That's why we stood up our $50 million foundation that just funds conservation. And all of our technologies are free for conservation, right? And so, you know, people are very busy. And so I don't expect them to go know everything about Colossal. They just hear people made dire wolves and they're like, oh my gosh, but wolves are in trouble. Why aren't we saving wolves? That's a fair assessment. The two things I was surprised about was there's 15 red wolves left in the world in the wild. Now there's more than 100 in captive breeding programs, but still from only 12 genetic lines. I was surprised that everyone in the world wasn't excited that, oh my gosh, they made more red wolves than they did dire wolves. And I was surprised that our poor little red wolves didn't get the same limelight, you know, because they're not cast in movies and TV shows, right? And so that was one surprise. That was surprise number one. And the only other surprise was, you know, the women and men at Colossal have done something no one else has ever done. There's ancient genes that have been lost for 12,000 years back in the closest living relative to the dire wolf, right? And But I was a little overwhelmed by how many people trivialize this monumental moment for science and wanted to just argue taxonomy classification. And so it's a weird argument because I think that there's 31 ways to classify a species. And my argument is like, if you want to call it a direwolf, great. If you want to call it the colossal direwolf, great. If you want to call it a the most genetically modified wolf in the world, great. Like whatever makes you happy. But let's not lose sight of the importance of conservation and of the importance of the technologies. This is a monumental step in genome engineering. And I hate that the semantic argument became a focus over the importance of scientific process.
So what are the wolves up to then? Are there going to be more?
It's a great question. So we've got Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. But yeah, they are in their ecological reserve. They're doing well. We will make another few. I think our goal is to get to kind of a 5 to 8 total pack size. And then we'll continually study them behaviorally. They're now behaving more and more like traditional wolves, which is great. And then, over time, then just based on conversations we have with some of our indigenous partners and others, we'd love to rewild them back in areas where they're wanted, that's far away from like cattle or anything that could be a conflict. And several of our indigenous people groups are pretty interested in having them due to kind of the ancestral nature of them. So, yeah.
Moving on to the world of print, British-Jamaican menswear designer Bianca Saunders released her third zine, 38 Love Lane. The photojournal was made in collaboration with Amsterdam-based photographer Kwabena Seki Apia Inti, who set out to intimately capture the personal exploration of Saunders' Jamaican heritage. Visuals honor the beauty of everyday life on the Caribbean island, telling the story of two men and their families. Meanwhile, words by writer Jordan Anderson, an interview with Bianca's mother, Yvonne Saunders, and photos she took during her travels in her early 20s. Speaking to Monocle's Maria Papakliantos, Saunders shares how the project took shape, her enduring love for zines, and their connection to her creative practice.
This is actually my third zine since I've started the brand, or I guess started what I was doing. And zine has always been a way to kind of like connect the research of what I've wanted to kind of explore. The first zine I did was personal politics, which is like exploring like Black masculinity. And that's what kind of launched the framework of like what my brand is. And then the second one was We Are One and the Same. And I think it kind of touched on like the two twins. One was male, one was female. And just in terms of the connection of like how we have our similarities, but we also have our differences in terms of what we look like. And I think that kind of brought in a bit more of a genderless approach. And then this one, 38 Love Lane, was kind of about like my cultural background and identity exploration. And a lot of it is kind of like I do use a lot of like reference images from my mum and my experience of Jamaica as well. And being British Jamaican and that identity exploration has been a big part of that. Then I guess I connected with Kwabena, so he's a photographer that I worked with on the zine, and it was quite great because in terms of the creative, we was equally able to kind of explore it in different ways. So I guess for him, it was more exploration. So we followed, I guess, two guys that were based out there, got to know their families. They took him around and stuff like that. And then the name 38 Love Lane became a thing because of one of the roads that we shot on.
Oh, okay.
And then I was showing him like my family images, and there was such a similarity of like what was then and now. So my mum had quite a lot of images when she in her early 20s, but Jamaica doesn't really changes. I feel like countries like that are very much more slower pace, and it's kind of like familiarity is a big touch point of kind of connection.
Amazing. I mean, I know in the zine it says, I picked this quote that I really liked. It says, "It's a portrait of Jamaica that feels intimate yet infinite, a connection to something larger than ourselves." Can you tell me about like how you view Jamaica and how the zine portrays that version that you think of when you think of Jamaica?
I think there's just a warmth to the images, and I think there's a slight distance, but also connection. I think that's what I get from the feeling. Like every time I go back, it's like, okay, it reminds. Well, of course, I'm born here, but it reminds me of like my full circle of like who I am and the things I've learned, like the traditions I've been brought up on, and the connection with the people that I feel related to. So I think that's what it essentially does for me. And the writing was done by Jordan Anderson. So he is a Jamaican that lives in Milan. So he was the previous editor of fashion, NSS magazine based in Milan. And I guess he relocated to Milan to kind of like push his journey within fashion. And Jamaica is such a small country, but it, of course, is quite like globally known. But to be able to do opportunities like that, the global scale of the Western world does help and prevail that a bit more. So I guess his experience on that also aided in terms of the wording.
I mean, I've seen the zine and I've seen some amazing visuals that were captured by Gwabena. Can you tell me a bit about your collaboration, how it was working together, and I guess how the visuals kind of portray both of your visions of Jamaica?
I think a lot of the time when it comes to like images, I always prefer it to be more like documentary style. So when we were thinking about it, we didn't want it to be like overly fashion and overly staged. So like in terms of the clothing pieces that are included from the brand, it's kind of like seamed in and out. So it is a bit more natural. So there was a couple of pieces that I guess got him to bring over, and then the stylist picked and chose. And then some pieces, it was like selecting what was okay for it to be included that wasn't my brand. So it kind of felt a bit like some of the images of one of my interns was looking through them, he thought it was like a research image that we had. And I was like, no, that's actually part of the zine. That's a new image, not like a reference. So it's quite nice to have those elements, to be able to like maybe even a couple of collections in, to refer back to it.
Absolutely. I mean, also your mom was interviewed for the zine. Can you tell me a bit about how significant that is for you to have your mom be part of this? And is your mom someone that brings the Jamaican connection that you have as well into the brand?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. So with my mum, to be fair, that series of images that I chose for the zine is like things I've referenced in like Spring Summer 20, AW20, like different collections. I'm like, okay, let's pull this image out kind of thing from like her collection of images. My dad doesn't actually have that many images, or maybe he just doesn't show me them, even though they are both Jamaican. But my mum, she's such a storyteller, and she's always talking about memories of when her aunt used to take her for like long summers in Jamaica. And then there was a point that she even like had an accent and went to school out there for a small while as well too. So I think her storytelling has influenced me in terms of like my vision of what I see my art fashion world as.
You are listening to The Curator, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Next up on the program, we're off to Rome to sample a bit of the good life aboard Italy's new premium overnight rail service, the aptly named La Dolce Vita Orient Express. The Italian capital is the starting point for this latest addition to the world of luxury sleeper trains, and we dispatched Monocle correspondent Ivan Carvalho to Rome to report on the rollout of this decidedly upscale approach to rail travel.
Rome is the birthplace of La Dolce Vita, that enviable lifestyle of enjoying small daily pleasures and moving at a slower pace. Now, all that is going mobile with a new luxury train designed to explore the best of the Bel Paese. Launched this month, the La Dolce Vita Orient Express is run by Italian hospitality brand Arsenale and French hotel group Accor, owner of the famed Orient Express brand, the world's most famous passenger train. The new service looks to pamper guests as they journey on overnight excursions to destinations across the peninsula, from Portofino to the vineyards of Montalcino. The indulgence starts in Rome, where travelers check into Orient Express La Minerva, a newly renovated Grand Hotel next to the Pantheon. After a restful night, a chauffeur takes passengers to Roma Ostiense station, where a lounge, complete with showers and a spacious bar, greets them. Smartly dressed porters then whisk bags away to the carriage. From stewards to barmen and the onboard maitre d', staff are impeccably attired in outfits that turn back the clock. Orient Express CEO Gilda Perez Alvarado remarked before the train's inaugural trip the aim was to take inspiration from the 1960s Dolce Vita period, one of the most exciting periods of travel. On board, 31 chic cabins with ensuite bathrooms await, all done in tastefully designed 1970s-style interiors from Dimore Studio, a Milan design team. Once unpacked, guests head to the restaurant car for lunch, and a menu overseen by Michelin chef Heinz Beck. Next door is the lounge car with full-service bar, where after dinner, live music and dancing is offered. Trains take scenic routes through less traveled regions, like Abruzzo, with its picturesque Trans-Siberian rail line that cuts through mountains. Carefully planned itineraries, including a 2-night trip to Sicily, ensure guests are engaged on and off the train, explains La Dolce Vita Orient Express general manager Marco Girotto.
What is special about the project is that we put a lot of effort planning our itineraries, designing our itineraries, matching the time you have on board with the scenery you see and the meals you have on board, and the experiences off board. For example, you leave in the morning, you have a nice meal overlooking a nice scenery, you have a relaxing afternoon in your suite, you arrive in Venice in the evening, you have dinner in a private palazzo, you have a tour of the Canal Grande with a luxury boat, you come back on the train, you have a relaxing night, you have an after party at the bar car.
By utilizing a network of railways not typically traveled on by most visitors, people get a new appreciation for Italy, all the while being well looked after, on board and off. For Monocle, riding on the La Dolce Vita Orient Express, I'm Ivan Carvalho.
And now we have a highlight from Monocle on Design. We speak with Omer Arbel, the creative director of Bocci. He discusses his research-driven approach in which experiments with material lead the way to future projects and objects.
The sort of umbrella over all three areas of our work, which are industrial design leading to sort of product design, one, architecture, another, and the third remains sort of at that initial research stage. So the conceptual umbrella over all of it is the idea that form can come from a process rather than from a preconceived imagination of the author. Our job, or my job, me and my colleague, is to invent novel techniques, novel ways of working with materials, starting with their chemical or physical or mechanical properties, developing new tools or just simply new techniques or sequences of techniques. So that's the sort of easy part, is playing around all day long. And then the hard part is accepting whatever happens, because in many cases the results are grotesque or not necessarily fitting into people's conventional perceptions of beauty or marketability or any of these criteria that's usually applied to design. And so we do that all year, and then at the end of the year, my business partner and I sit and decide and surround ourselves with the things we've made, which it's interesting because there's no scale and no budget and no schedule, and we just have whatever we have on the floor, and then we decide, oh, this one might want to be a product, or this one could be part of a building, and whatever is left stays in the archive and remains research. And that's almost the kind of most exciting work. In a way, most of the time it stays in the archive because the production value is so high. It has some sort of fatal flaw. It's like too expensive, or it's very fragile in many cases, or it's just simply impossible to replicate, like we've somehow magically made something and we can't make it again. And that stays in the archive and waits for an opportunity to be exhibited in some context.
That's quite fascinating. So when do you go back to the archive and be like, okay, it's time to revive this?
A few years ago at the Victorian Albert Museum, we played a lot with the coefficient of expansion of materials. It's the rate at which materials expand and contract. It's affected by temperature. So certain materials expand and contract faster in response to temperatures and others slower. And so for years we had played with matching the coefficient of expansion for glass and copper. And that opened up a whole sort of 5 years of research, because we could finally combine those two materials. We could make metals look glassy and glass looks metallic. It was a fascinating thing, and each one responded to the other in all these beautiful ways. But everything suggests its opposite. And so we also decided to change the recipe of glass. By then we were also well-versed in the chemistry of the material, and so we decided to make a recipe for glass that has exactly the opposite characteristic, which is to say that it diverges very rapidly from the coefficient of expansion of copper. When the glassblowers make vessels of any shape that they like, and we pour liquid copper into the interior of them, while the two are hot, they coexist nicely, but as soon as they start cooling, they do so at different rates. The glass shatters off, leaving a sort of shadow of itself in copper. At the V&A, it was lovely because what I suggested is that they use pieces from the collection, both for the glass and the copper. In other words, the quality of the two materials doesn't matter. So we thought it would be cool if there was like cultural artifacts transformed into new cultural artifacts.
We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Banking is our craft.
You're back here with The Curator, a weekly highlight show here on Monocle Radio, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Time for some delicious treats from the menu. We feature now Noma Café. Gabriele Delisanti meets Noma's Caroline Lane from Noma Café to learn about the restaurant's new bean roasting venture.
If you ask Caroline Lane for her title at Noma, she'll say jokingly that she's the restaurant's Chief Infusions Officer. And while that might not be her official title, it perfectly captures her role since joining the team in 2018. That is, extracting flavor from a variety of ingredients through infusion, roasting, and oxidizing. Among these is coffee. One of Caroline's key responsibilities has been overseeing Noma's official coffee program. The cup of coffee served to guests at the end of their multi-course meal. The challenge was to develop a signature approach, crafting a brew that was neither too strong nor too light. Most recently, this effort has led to a major step, the launch of Noma's own roasted coffee. It delivers 2 types of coffee each month, accompanied by a note from the Noma team complete with brewing instructions and flavor notes. But to understand what led to this milestone, Caroline walks me through Noma's journey, from brewing all the way to roasting.
I started working at Noma some 7 years ago. I arrived as a very excited and energetic, enthusiastic young person, interested in a lot of things, and saw Noma as a kind of really amazing venue to kind of test all of those interests, see more or less where I landed. Very quickly that became within the kind of coffee and tea sphere of the restaurant, mostly because actually those are the things that I can see myself drinking every day, especially coffee. It's something that I drink once or twice a day. And often it's kind of regarded as a bit of an afterthought in the restaurant experience. And the thing that drew me to this place was actually coffee. I heard about Noma when watching YouTube videos of the 2013 Nordic Roasters Forum, where Rene delivered this speech where he kind of pledged to have a world-class coffee service at Noma. And I, young coffee nerd that I was, I was super impressed and thought, wow, it would be super interesting to brew coffee in a restaurant. Because of course that's different than brewing coffee in a cafe. This guy seems kind of interesting. And lo and behold, the following year I was working there. I arrived, I had all of these interests. I was super impressed by the coffee program, really impressed that, we did pour over black coffee and espresso, and we measured the extraction of all of the coffee that we served and applied a very kind of scientific and quality-driven approach to what we were doing. And over the years, we developed a kind of language and like an identity, and we realized that actually this way of brewing is not necessarily the best way for our specific context. So we started to devise a new way of brewing coffee. And where we landed was that we more or less made a hybrid brewing method. It's somewhere in between a filter coffee and an espresso. And the reason we do that is because at the end of a 20-course meal, the palate becomes very tired, and an espresso is simply too strong, and a filter coffee is simply not strong enough. So we started making some more intentional decisions in regards to how we brew coffee. And of course, when you're at the point at which you are considering so deeply how you brew, it only makes sense that you apply that same perspective throughout the whole supply chain. So then it kind of became a no-brainer to start sourcing and roasting it too.
Until now, the restaurant has worked with Oslo-based roastery Tim Vendelbo. But a few years ago, the idea emerged. Once Noma's coffee program was fully developed, roasting in-house would be the natural next step. The program that Caroline helped develop is, in short, centered on using a light roast in an espresso machine, with the ability to dilute the coffee to achieve the desired intensity. So for Noma, roasting their own beans wasn't just about refining their approach to serving coffee. It was about fostering long-term relationships with farmers around the world and reaching a wider audience beyond their guests. A way of sharing the journey behind each cup of coffee, from the careful selection of beans to the connections Caroline and the team have built along the way.
Researching the coffee industry in-depthly, a lot of times when we begin a new project, we begin with an abstract idea. We don't begin with the form fully fleshed out. So when we pledge to go to Kyoto to open a restaurant or a pop-up, the idea is, okay, we're going to imagine that Noma was always based in Kyoto. And then we figure out along the way what form that takes. Likewise with the coffee project. So our task was to imagine how a Noma coffee roastery would be. Like, what would this look like if Noma was always a coffee roastery? I think that's a good way to put it, actually. So this always begins with research. For the pop-up, that involves a team of people going to Japan, traveling Japan, coming to understand the place, this new territory that we're entering. And it's only by understanding that you have to treat that industry with a great deal of respect. You can't assume that you know everything, and you enter a new place and you'll immediately contribute. And that research took the shape of visiting a lot of different roasteries, also Tim's, spending time roasting with different teams, spending time behind different bars, talking to a lot of different people. You can taste that the Mexican coffees in the first subscription are grown differently. They taste floral and bright and very atypical. These are coffees that I first encountered in 2018 when I first joined the Noma team, actually. I was really, really touched by one coffee in particular, grown by a lady called Berta in zine. It was unlike any Mexican coffee that I'd ever tried. And when we came back to this project, I was looking for these particular coffees. And it was funny because I described this story to an exporter that we work with, or the exporter that we work with in Mexico. His name is Jesus. I described this espresso to him, and he kind of smiled cheekily, and he was presenting some coffees to us, and we tasted all of these coffees completely blind, and I pointed at 4, and I was like, these are amazing. And the cheeky smile turns into like laughter. And I say, why are you laughing? He's like, well, that espresso you told me about, the Garnica from Berta in Zine, well, this is also Garnica, and it's also grown by the Insin family. It's just grown by all of her family members, more or less. So picking this coffee out blind from a table, that's a pretty special, like, full circle thing. I think you can instinctively recognize when a coffee carries this energy. And these are the kinds of stories that we want to build in this subscription. It's like an invitation to come with us as we figure it out, as we find the form for the values that we're trying to communicate. The values of, of course, taste, but also of respect for context, for nature, for knowledge, also for native wisdom. It's a very different thing to source coffee in Mexico than it is in Colombia, than it is in Ethiopia. It's a very different pop-up to do in Mexico than in Japan.
I couldn't leave without asking one last question. How does Caroline enjoy her daily coffee? Her favorite is a simple V60 pour-over. But for her, as she tells me, the key takeaway is that the perfect brew isn't universal. It's personal.
I have a cup of coffee every single morning, right? So I brew it the same way every day. And, when I'm at work, that's when I'm kind of playful. But first thing in the morning, I want a cup of V60 pour-over coffee. That is what I want. And it's not what we serve at the restaurant anymore, but it is, in my mind, the perfect way to start a morning. But, I've also brewed coffee in a number of... I've also, for example, boiled coffee over a fire when camping, or any number of things. But, using fresh but rested beans is, for me, an important thing. Rested because you want some of the carbon dioxide trapped in the bean in that roasting process to dissipate. What ends up happening is that acts as a barrier between the water and the ground coffee. So my personal recommendation is use rested coffee, so 2-3 weeks off the roast day is ideal. I think this is sometimes a little bit of a myth, that you have to use super freshly roasted coffee. So using rested, high-quality beans, using filtered water, grinding it fresh, observing measurements when you're brewing as well. That's just going to help you make more replicable recipes, help you stay consistent. And then otherwise, there are no other rules as far as I'm concerned. Just play around until you find what makes sense for you.
For Monocle in Copenhagen, I'm Gabriele Delisanti.
And the Osaka Expo in Japan opened last Sunday. And this week we've been featuring some of the pavilions. So now let's introduce the Japan Pavilion, representing the host country, of course. Ryuma Takahashi from Monocle Radio visited the site and sent us this report on the Japan Pavilion, narrated by Mariella Bevan.
The Japan Pavilion embodies the Osaka Expo's theme of designing future societies for our lives. But Japan presents its own take on the concept. The Between Lives Pavilion features exhibitions centred around the idea of circulation that has been deeply rooted in Japanese culture for centuries. Aided by some of Japan's most popular global sensations, characters like Hello Kitty, Doraemon and Bear Bricks, the exhibitions showcase the power of microorganisms and waste recycling technologies. They've even installed a biogas plant inside the pavilion that generates energy from food waste collected throughout the expo grounds. The pavilion building itself is quite a sight. Its unique architectural design with countless wooden panels arranged in a circular pattern visually represents the theme of circulation. The interior is divided into 3 areas, and visitors can begin their tour from any area thanks to its loop-style layout, aided by audio guides that you're hearing elements of during this broadcast.
Ahead of you lies an algae wonderland, seemingly quiet, but possessing astonishing potential. Let's go see what it holds.
In the farm area, Hello Kitty appears dressed as algae to guide you through Japan's food culture and cutting-edge technology. In another space recreating a photobioreactor, which is an algae cultivation device, It's as if you've been transported into the world of algae.
Built to be fragile, made to last. At first, it might sound like a contradiction, but in fact, it's one of the defining features of Japan's traditional approach to cyclical craftsmanship.
In the factory area, Doraemon serves as your guide through Japan's circular manufacturing technologies, which are entertainingly presented in factory-inspired exhibitions.
A massive conveyor belt creeps forward, deep into a cavernous space. Vegetable and fruit peels, straws and cutlery, cardboard packaging, one by one, they are carried into the heart of the Japan Pavilion.
Finally, the plant area focuses on the circulation of waste and water. Bear Bricks is dressed as various substances like water and carbon dioxide, expressing the circulation of waste, microorganisms, and water. There's a fantastical installation highlighting the activities of microorganisms and a courtyard with a massive basin filled with water that's purified from within the pavilion's plant. From this courtyard, you can fully appreciate the beauty of the pavilion's architecture. This area also features one of the world's largest Mars meteorites, attracting many visitors' attention. The Japan Pavilion offers a rich experience highlighting Japan's appeal through its distinctive architectural design, factory-style presentations, and pop culture characters. And it's a strong starting pavilion for visitors to the Expo's host nation.
And now we would like to introduce another pavilion, the Philippines one, part of the Empowerment Life section of the Expo. Earlier, Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi spoke with Marga Nograles, Secretary General of the Philippine Organizing Committee.
Our pavilion, Philippines Pavilion theme is nature, culture, and community, woven together for a better future, or simply just woven. So our goal and the essence of why it is our theme is because we are looking to empower, continue on empowering our indigenous communities around the Philippines, and continue on weaving all components of the Philippines to create experiences for those that come visit the Philippines.
Yes, thank you. The unique architecture is very eye-catching. Could you tell us about the thoughts behind the design of this pavilion?
Each component of our facade is hand-woven. It is not a mere structure. It is not a building. It is an experience, and it comes to life with every piece of what we have outside. And then next also, if you notice outside, we have the hand-woven textiles in framed, right? So those frames open to show live performances. So we will have live performances in our facade twice a day starting next month. So that is something you must experience. The very first time I saw the Philippine Pavilion was maybe a month ago. I cried. It was just so beautiful. We put our heart and soul into creating this experience. And, you know, as we were creating, as we were doing the prototypes, as we were doing the drawings, you know, we had something in mind. We wanted it to come to life, but we weren't sure. But when we saw the actual structure, it was just exactly how we imagined it to be.
Yes, thank you. I could see the variety of textile from across Philippines. Could you tell us about the exhibits in this pavilion?
We are very proud to share that our whole pavilion is hand-woven in the Philippines, the whole facade. So from our hand-woven rattan to the over 200 hand-woven textiles by our indigenous communities all over the Philippines. So this is the largest collection of weavers ever for the Philippines. So at the Tourism Promotions Board, we have what we call our community-based tourism program. So what we do here is we empower our indigenous communities and we encourage them to keep telling their story, right? We want them to fight to keep their stories alive. So that's a big program in our agency. So it is inspired and aligned with what we are doing here.
Yes, I could enjoy many forms of entertainment here, such as dancing and photo booth with AI and traditional massage and Filipino foods. Why did you decide to add such various entertainment elements to this pavilion?
Yes, well, first of all, there's so many stories to be told in the Philippines. We have over 7,641 islands. Each island has a unique story to tell. So what we had wanted to do is give little snippets of those experiences into the Philippines. So following our theme, we wanted to bring in that tech experience into the pavilion. But what we are saying here is as we transition into the era of the digitalization, we wanted to keep the heart of our stories alive in the Philippines because nothing will ever compare to human connection. And as we talk about it, we ask, what is the power of the Philippines? The power of the Philippines is really in our people. The talent and creativity of the Filipino is truly world-class. So as you come into the Philippines, we invite you to dance with nature. So we have live performances, but we want you to dance with us also. That's just one experience of how, when you go into the Philippines, the best experience into the Philippines should be had with a Filipino, taking you around Philippines.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to you and the staff here, I feel like I am on the street in the Philippines.
So happy. You must come to the Philippines then. Well, I would think when they come visit and experience the Philippine Pavilion, they will want to go to the Philippines to experience for themselves the many, many, many reasons to love the Philippines.
And now from the urbanist, stadiums and sports arenas are more than mere stages for sport. They bring the community together and at their best can drive meaningful urban renewal. This has been at the heart of the work by architecture firm Hawk, which has worked on everything from Stockholm's Avicii Arena to the revamp of Manchester's AO Arena. We meet Hawk's sports and entertainment director John Rhodes to hear how sports venues are being rethought to serve not just fans but entire neighborhoods too.
I think everyone has their own personal relationship with their stadium or their team's stadium. But really, you know, if you're sort of designing a new stadium, I think it really needs to become part of the team and their endeavour to win, the 12th man in that competition. So a difficult place, you know, where a team play, you know, an away team comes to play. If you can amplify that expectation of the home ground, it's great. But it's a place where you want to create awe, atmosphere, and really celebrate history and heritage of great victories of the past. So really, I think that's fundamental to, if you can create this place which becomes an identity for the team, an identity for the region or the city, I think that's where the best stadiums are really seen.
And moving away from the feeling into the more physical world, what makes a stadium so brilliant for a city and its natural environment?
Well, you know, look, in the cases of a lot of the modern stadiums, there's such big pieces of infrastructure. I think it's historically they haven't been as successful as they could be to really articulate the character of a city. So I think there's obviously a conversation between the physical scale of these things and people's perception of scale. So normally the only building that you would interface with of that scale is maybe an airport. So I think it's important that stadiums really grasp the character of their city, the character of their team, and in some way amplify that and actually sort of build on that character to define the place. So that, you should be able to go to a stadium and really understand the city and its people within the hour or so that you're there.
Well, speaking of which, let's talk about some of your big blockbuster clients, from Stockholm's Avicii Arena to Manchester's AO Arena. How do you approach reimagining venues that already have this deep cultural and architectural significance?
Well, I think it's a fascinating topic in itself. So, you know, despite the Colosseum and other such buildings, the modern stadium is actually relatively new typology. And really, we're starting to see the end of that first generation of these stadiums that are sort of 30 to 50 years old. So there's lots of this infrastructure out there that has come to an age where it needs refreshing, it needs reconsidering or replacing. Now, the great thing is that really, if you can take these assets and give them a new lease of life, I think it's fundamentally the best solution. Essentially, you can save up to 60% in embodied carbon within the substructure and superstructure. So it's a really meaningful, taking existing infrastructure and turning it into something which is, modernised and regenerated. So in Stockholm, we were invited by the municipality, by SJF, this is a sort of joint venture between the city and the operator, to really look at the Avicii Arena. The Avicii Arena was formerly known as the Globen and was renamed after the DJ as a sort of memorial to the DJ. Essentially, the building itself is really dominant. It sits on the skyline of Stockholm. It is really, really loved by many people. It, to a certain extent, is listed in terms of its character it was only built in 1989, but it is really seen as part of the character of Stockholm. So to be asked to look at it was quite a privilege and also a challenge. So essentially, to describe this building, it is almost an enormous golf ball. It's 80 metres tall, and it was basically the biggest spherical building in the world, and arguably still is, rather than a spherical structure in Vegas. And this building in itself, as I say, is cavernous. So you go inside and you have this splendid experience of understanding the domed structure. Now, our role was, unfortunately, that's in some ways contraindicative to the way that you would design an arena. So you're creating a cavernous space. Obviously, that comes with challenges such as echoes and reverberation and things such as that. So our role was to, how do we modernise this arena? How do we make it fit for purpose in a modern state, but also maintain the character, the splendour of that dome, so you can still engage with this wonderful piece of architecture, but at the same time make it perform at the same level as a modern arena. So the idea was to actually look at the acoustics in particular, because that was one of the biggest challenges. And the real core of the scheme was to actually take a neighbouring arena, which is called the Hova Arena, and take the teams that are playing in there and bring them into the national arena. And the challenge with that is that they're a smaller team, they want an intimate experience. They were reluctant to go into this cavernous space because, they'd be lost in that space. So our job was to really redesign that atmosphere to allow that teams that play in there to come home to their new venue. So to do that, we looked at this idea of actually introducing an acoustic cloud at the sort of midpoint of the dome, the equator, as it were. And that allowed us to reduce the sort of volume of that space. But this acoustic cloud was essentially a cable net structure, almost like a Pringle, like a Pringle crisp type structure. And really, within that cable net, we then introduced a moving roof, a moving ceiling, which allowed us to change the acoustics and respond to the performance and the content within that space. So we're really excited by the strategy, but quite a bold move to really introduce this cable net within the structure. Now, that allowed us to actually change the acoustics, but still, before an event, actually still engage with the beautiful majesty of the dome. So you can see through the cable net and such like, but obviously the moving panels come in there to reduce the volume, to reduce the acoustics, and to change the atmosphere. So the actual ceiling, it becomes very much part of that theatrical spectacle of the event. Our role also was to look at the seating bowl itself, so to really look at the existing infrastructure and revision it in a modern sense. So looking at the way the bowl performs, bring people closer to the action. And with the reconfiguration of this wonderful cloud, we also looked at the ways we could actually bring in some gondolas at high level. So really building a bridge across the high-level seating to bring a whole new hospitality experience where fans look right down on the ice pad of where the ice hockey's been playing. So really creating these, we call them the gondolas, but essentially they're hospitality bridges that link across the spectator seating. So that was something that we're very excited by, and it really is a tremendous space to be in. It's a place where you can see a completely new experience of viewing the ice hockey, but at the same time, again, engage with a beautiful dome above. So that was our main strategy, and it was almost like building a ship in a bottle, that we had to really build this quite an extensive piece of infrastructure within an existing building and really tying it into that listed structure. So really the structural solution becomes almost invisible of what was new and what was old. It really does feel like an intervention that was meant to be there. And, we're very excited by the outcome of it.
And finally, here on the show, it is the unlikely hit of the Swedish spring, a live string of moose migrating north, watched for hours, sometimes days, by viewers at home and abroad. The great moose migration has become a surprise cultural phenomenon, part of a wider Scandinavian affection for slow TV, long, meditative broadcast of everything, from train journeys to knitting marathons. But what's behind this appetite for stillness, and what does it say about modern media habits in the region? What makes the great moose migration such compelling viewing in a digital landscape built for speed and short attention spans? Let's find out with Petri Burtsov, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent.
Petri, slow TV's been around in Norway and Sweden for over a decade. What's behind its enduring popularity?
Good morning, Georgina. I would also add that it's been around in Finland for at least 6 or 7 years, and of course, as you mentioned, in Sweden and Norway. That's a really big question. I think two reasons. I mean, the first reason I think is that, I mean, this of course applies globally. We are just so inundated with sort of negative news and this sort of 24-hour news cycle and then instant notifications on our phones and on our computers, that slow TV is sort of an antidote to all of this. You know, it de-stresses you when, you know, you are not in control. You are just like, I'm watching the Great Moose Migration now on my TV. I'm basically just watching a young moose standing in a nice coniferous forest and waiting to cross the river to summer pastures. There's just something so sort of unstressful about it. But then I think also, I mean, why in the Nordic countries in particular, I think it says something about our relationship with nature. I think, I mean, obviously I'm speaking as a Finn, but I think the same would apply to the Swedes and Norwegians as well. We still have a very close relationship with the nature. Most of us grew up in a forest or near a forest. And I mean, if I think about Helsinki or Finland, there's not a spot in Finland, in all of Finland, where forest is more than sort of a 5-minute bike ride away. So I think it's something sort of like gives us a glimpse of the nature also when we live these busy urban lives.
Is there something uniquely public service minded about this kind of programming, or is it crossing over into commercial success too?
That's a really good question also, Georgina. I think it has a lot to do with public service broadcasting. If you look at the different shows in the Nordic countries, they're all produced by NRK, the public broadcaster in Norway. Like the Moose Migration that I'm watching now and that you mentioned, that's a co-production between Yle, the Finnish public broadcaster, and SVT, the Swedish public broadcasters. Because, I mean, these kinds of shows, they don't, let's face it, they don't make money. That's like the Moose Migration is 330 hours of just completely unedited, no commentary, just watching a live feed from a forest. So how do you make money with that? But then, as you said, lots of viewers. I believe in Sweden last year, the Moose Migration attracted 9 million viewers, and in Finland over 1 million viewers as well. Mind you, I mean, it's a streaming show on a website, so they count viewer as a viewer, somebody who basically just clicked on it and watched for just one second. So, it's not like there's, going to be 10 million people in the Nordics tuning in every day to watch this. But still, that's a lot of people. So perhaps there is an opportunity here for the commercial broadcasters as well.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you for listening.